Hello, my name is Captain Pedro, and today I'm going to cover a very important topic as it relates to boating safety. A fire on a boat can be the greatest potential for disaster, and having a good fire prevention plan along with the correct fire extinguishers and fire prevention knowledge is going to be critical if you're ever faced with a fire on your boat. Now, don't worry if you feel like you have room for improvement in this area, because I'm going to cover this in detail and make sure that you're confident about putting together a good fire prevention plan for your boat. Now, before we dive into how to properly extinguish a fire, the different classifications of fires and of fire extinguishers, and how to use a fire extinguisher, let's start off with a little basic understanding of exactly what a fire needs in order to survive. So all fires need three things to exist, and knowing these three things is important for fire prevention and for fire extinguishing. These three things are classified in what is called the fire triangle. The first item in the triangle is heat. The second item in the triangle is fuel. So a fire needs a fuel source to be able to continue to burn. And then lastly, a fire needs oxygen to also continue to burn. Now, if any of these three items are removed from the equation, a fire is not going to be able to start. And if the fire is started and you remove one of the three from the equation, the fire is not going to be able to continue to burn. Now, knowing these three items is going to be very important for you, because it's going to help you identify potential fire hazards that you may have on the boat. And then it's going to help you identify how to properly extinguish that fire. Now, let's cover some potential fire hazards that you could potentially have on your boat and where they would be. Understanding the different types of potential fire hazards that you can have on your boat is going to be critical to ensure that you can identify them and correct any deficiencies that you may have. And it's going to enable you to ensure that you're better prepared to have a good fire prevention plan on your boat. So the first one are engine rooms. This is a very common place for fires to start on a boat. And a common issue that you can encounter is that water lines can break, and then they're going to leak, and they're going to be spewing water on electrical items such as your alternator, and that's going to create a fire. Now, this can also occur within your outboard motors. So now that you know this is why it's so important to ensure that your bilge area is going to be free of combustible items and oily rags and dirty rags that you might have in that engine room. Take those out of there, because that's going to fuel the fire. Additionally, it's going to be very important that you have a good maintenance plan, either for your inboard or your outboard motors, to ensure that you're keeping up with all of the maintenance and hoses and everything that needs to be serviced on the boat, and that you also have a good pre-trip and post-trip visual inspection to make sure that if something gets damaged, that you'll be able to repair it in time. Another potential hazard is going to come from your electrical components. Things can short out, causing wires to get hot and melt, which provides a fuel source for electrical fires. This is why it's so important that when you have an issue with any of your electrical components on the boat, that you fix it correctly, and that you also have a visual inspection before and after you go out on the boat to make sure that at a quick glance, everything looks the way that it should. There's no melted wires or any melted connectors that could lead you to know that there's an issue in that component. And always remember to use the required fuse and breakers for all of your connections. This way, if something were to fail, it's going to blow that fuse or blow that breaker and prevent a fire from starting within your electrical components. Another very common area where a fire can start is going to be from your fuel lines and from your oil lines. And if one of these were to rupture and start a fire, it's going to produce a constant fuel source to fuel that fire, and it's highly combustible. This is why I always conduct a visual inspection of all of my fuel lines, electrical components, everything on the motors before and after I get back from going out on the boat. And I always conduct a check for fuel vapors that are in the bilge before and after every one of my fishing trips. And I do this by simply opening the hatch and smelling in the bilge area to see if there's any fuel vapors. Now, this goes without saying, but if you ever check and you open your hatch and you smell fuel vapors in your bilge or your engine room, if you have an inboard of your vessel, I would definitely not go out on the boat until this is properly identified where the leak is coming from and that it is properly fixed. Remember that the smallest spark can provide a fuel source for the vapors that are in your bilge to explode. The next place that could be a potential fire hazard is going to be the bilge in your boat. So just like the engine room, you're going to want to make sure that this area is free of all combustible items, oily rags, and make sure that you don't have any leaks of oil or anything that's seeping down and just being held in your bilge. You want it to be very clean and free of all potential fire hazards. So remember the fire triangle. If you have any of these three items in your bilge, you're going to be providing a fuel source for a potential fire. Another area that people really don't think about when they're identifying potential fire hazards are the batteries. Batteries, when they're charging, emit hydrogen gas, which is highly flammable. And these gases can get trapped in the compartments where the batteries are in and be sealed and locked in there. This is why it's so important to make sure that you have your batteries in a well-ventilated area when they're charging. Now, this doesn't mean take your batteries out of where they're at, but open a hatch, open the door in your console if they're inside the console. Make sure that you have a good airflow of ventilation so you can get this hydrogen gas to come out and not be trapped inside of those compartments. Again, go back to the fire triangle. The hydrogen gas would be the fuel source for the fire. So now that you know the areas within your boat that could be a potential fire hazard, let's go over the different classifications of fires. Now, knowing these different classifications of fires is gonna better prepare you in case you have a fire on your boat. You can identify what the fuel source is and how to put that fire out correctly, because not every fire is put out the same way. Fires are broken down into 4 different categories called classes. The first one are Class A fires. Fuel sources in this class of fire would include cloth like rags, rubber, wood, and paper. This class of fire can easily be extinguished by cooling the source of the fuel of the fire with large amounts of water. The next class is Class B fires. Now, Class B fires are driven by combustible liquids, flammable gases, and lubricants such as oil. And these fires cannot be extinguished with water because the impact of water is going to spread the fuel source, such as the oil, and it's going to cause the fire to spread. These fires are going to be best extinguished by smothering the fire with an extinguishing agent to remove the oxygen from the fire. Again, remember the fire triangle. In Class B fires, or any fire, but in Class B fires, if you're going to remove the oxygen by smothering the fire, it's going to extinguish the fire. And then next we have Class C fires. Class C fires are electrical fires. With Class C fires, it's going to be important not to use water because water is a conductor of electricity and could cause electrical shock if you come in contact with the water. When you have an electrical fire, it's going to be important to use an extinguishing agent that does not conduct electricity. Now, if you have a 12-volt system like I do on my center console, getting shocked with 12 volts is really not going to kill you. But if you're in a boat where you're running high appliances like maybe a yacht or a sport fisher, and you have power converters on this stuff, and you're putting out an electrical fire with water, and you come in contact with that water and the electricity, it could be a very bad incident. And the last class of fire is a Class D fire. These fires are going to be derived from combustible metals such as magnesium, sodium, and titanium. Okay, so now you know the different classifications of fires, so let's talk about the different classifications of fire extinguishers. Now, knowing the correct classification of fire extinguishers is going to help you identify, as you just heard, the correct fire extinguisher to put out the correct class of fire. Now, fire extinguishers are going to be broken down into 4 types. Each type specifically aligns with the type of fire that they're intended to put out. The first one is dry powder, and this is intended or designed to be used on Class A, B, C, and D fires. This makes the dry powder fire extinguisher the most versatile option for your boat. Then you have foam spray fire extinguishers, and these are only limited to Class A and Class B fires. Then you have water fire extinguishers, which are really only rated to be used on Class A fires. And lastly, you have CO2 fire extinguishers, which are rated to be used on Class B and C fires only. So now that you know the 4 different classes of fire extinguishers, you can clearly see that the dry powder fire extinguisher is going to be the top option for you to have on your boat. Okay, so now you know the different potential hazards that you could find on your boat. You know the different classifications of fires along with the classifications of fire extinguishers. Now what we need to do is make sure that you know how to use the fire extinguisher. So in this example, what we're going to go over is the dry powder fire extinguisher, because this is the one that you're going to need to have on your boat. And if you go to the store, this is going to be the most common one. But the first thing that you want to do is remove the pin from the fire extinguisher. Then you're going to want to do is aim the fire extinguisher at the base of the fire, then squeeze the trigger to emit the dry powder from the extinguisher. Now, one important thing to note is that if you're using this dry powder fire extinguisher, what you want to do is when you squeeze it and you're aiming it at the base of the fire, you want to go in a sweeping motion back and forth to make sure that you cover the entire base of the fire. And the reason why you want to aim it at the base of the fire is because this is where the fire is coming from. This is where the fuel source is for this fire. And once you eliminate that fuel source, remember the triangle, the fire is going to cease to exist. All right, congratulations, because now you know how to identify potential fire hazards on your boat. You know the different classifications of fires. You know the different classifications of fire extinguishers to put out each fire. And you are better prepared to put together a great fire prevention plan for your boat. If you want to check out more helpful boating tips, check out this playlist next.